I want to start by aligning my comments with the good Senator Kissel. He did a very, very good job of kind of getting to the heart of what this bill is about. And that is, and my words, not his, but I would call it a Trojan horse anti-police bill if I was going to characterize it to someone in a short few sentences. But I really want to especially align myself with his comments in favor of our local and state police and law enforcement in the state and the law enforcement agencies that protect us nationally. He mentioned the DEA and the ATF and so on. These are folks that put a uniform on day in and day out, and they keep the people of Connecticut and America safe. And it cannot be overstated just how important they are to maintaining law and order and making sure we live in a peaceful and prosperous nation. And when there are proposals to change our laws, to undermine our laws, that make police vulnerable or less capable at doing their jobs, we are risking not only the individual safety of those officers, but all of us. And that is, to me, the reason why this bill, frankly, is extremely offensive. I don't use that term lightly, and that's because I guess I'm a little frustrated. When I was first elected back in 2010, I think the biggest surprise that I had was to walk into the House chamber at the time and to discover that we were debating policy in good faith. That there were people of both parties there, passionate about what they believe in, but we were getting up and making the case for our positions, but we were doing it with respect, we were doing it with diplomacy, and an understanding that everyone had a right to speak their mind, to make their case for what they believe in, and we stuck to the policy. And of course, there was partisan politics going on then as there is now, but the partisan politics kind of stayed outside the building. It very rarely entered into the building, and I think the leadership in both parties made a point of saying, you know what, that's for the election stuff out there. Let's not bring this really divisive rhetoric and maybe imperfect truths into our chamber. Inside the building, where we make laws, we're doing something much more important, which is we're representing our constituents. We're not here just making political hay and trying to move our agenda and argue with the other side. We're here representing our constituents. We're the face, we're the voice of the people that elected us. And we should behave in a way that respects that. So I get very upset. I get frustrated when I see bills come to this chamber that are wholly partisan and political in nature. And this is right up there at the very top of partisan and political bills. As Senator Kissel laid out, most of this bill is patently unconstitutional. I think if you grabbed every member of this chamber, and again, it's not right of me to put words in people's mouths, but if you grabbed everyone off the record, I think they'd have a hard time explaining how this does not run afoul of the Connecticut or the Supremacy Clause of the U.S. Constitution. And just for the edification of people who don't really understand what that is, it's very straightforward. We have different levels of government. We have municipal, town government that is established as a direct result of the state declaring the existence of those towns. And they are giving a set of parameters to operate within. And the states, when we first formed our union as the United States of America, determined to maintain our individual state governments. That's why we're here in Hartford at the Connecticut State Capitol, writing our own laws and our own policies to govern the state of Connecticut. But at the time that happened, we also established a national government, and we gave the national government some responsibilities. And one of those very, very specific responsibilities, along with our national defense, we're not in here deciding whether we're going to go to war or we're going to engage in any military actions because we're a state government. And we don't have a role to play there. That's been transferred to the federal government at the establishment of our great nation. And so has the subject of immigration. And since the beginning of our country, it's been understood that immigration policy falls under the realm of the federal government. That is why there is a Customs and Border Patrol as a federal agency and not a state agency. That's why all of our immigration-related federal agencies are federal, because they are in charge of the subject of immigration, customs, citizenship, and so on. It's the United States, not the state of Connecticut, that makes immigration policy. And as a result, we do not have the power to govern the activities of federal agents or federal agencies when it comes to immigration law. What's so ironic about this is that this bill has been described to me by some as an extension of the Trust Act. And that's not true in the least. Because let me explain something. The Trust Act is a policy that basically tries to tie the hands of local and state police, and now every state official in Connecticut, so that they cannot engage with the federal authorities on the subject of immigration. And the reason why the Trust Act was born, created, invented by the majority was because they knew they couldn't do this. They knew they didn't have the power to tell the federal government what to do on the subject of immigration. The most they could do was try and hamstring our local and state officials when they interact with those federal officials. That's what the Trust Act is. Terrible policy, mind you, because that policy in and of itself has prevented federal immigration authorities from being able to apprehend and deport numerous criminals that have made the lives of Connecticut residents and those around the country, frankly, less safe. Before I get into the language of the bill, I just want to talk about a few more things. I want to start first by talking about the title. That's where I had originally intended to go. The title of this bill is an act concerning democracy and government accountability. And it might seem like a small thing for me to be arguing over the title of the bill, but titles of bills is something that really gets me going in this place. In fact, every year I put a bill proposal in myself to allow individual lawmakers to be able to challenge the titles of bills when they feel they're unfair. This is about as unfair as it gets. Because this bill is not about democracy and government accountability, and I resent, and I want to repeat, I resent the idea that at the end of the day, when I vote no on this, that somehow someone's going to say, Senator Sampson voted against democracy and government accountability. Because I'm the government accountability guy. I'm here to hold the government accountable. You can go around this building and ask my fellow lawmakers what made them come and run for office to come up here. But if you ask me, the answer I'm going to give you is I came here to hold this place accountable. Because I didn't like what our state government was doing, and I still don't. But this bill's not about government accountability. This bill is about a few things. The first thing it's about is a distraction. This is a distraction from what's actually going on in Connecticut. My constituents back home are scratching their heads today, wondering why we're talking about this ICE business and federal agents and all that. Because they're not asking for this. My email box fills up every day. I don't have a single soul asking me about this. They're asking me why their taxes are so high, why their electric bills are so high, why it's so unaffordable to live in Connecticut. What are you guys doing to help with property tax relief? My municipal leaders are asking the same thing. What are you guys going to do to help us? We're going to get killed with these revaluations and the constant mandates coming from Hartford. That's what the people care about. They don't care about this. This is the majority distracting from their record of being in power for decades, holding every lever of power in the state of Connecticut and failing on all the levels that I just described. This is a distraction. It shifts the debate away from affordability, taxes, energy costs, and onto ICE and national politics. The majority is legislating national headlines instead of solving actual problems. I think for the majority, they feel comfortable attacking the president and the national Republicans and capitalizing on what's happening in the news media and the news coming out of Minneapolis. I'm sure that's very comfortable for them. It's in vogue for them. It's something that is fashionable and politically convenient. It's probably even emotionally satisfying to get up and talk that way. But it is a distraction nonetheless. This bill is also a strike-all amendment. I just can't let it go without mentioning it, because this is a bill that properly went before the Judiciary Committee, had a public hearing in a different format, and also because I spent the entire day yesterday preparing for this debate, looking at an entirely different bill. I took a lot of time with a highlighter, going through the bill, circling things, writing comments in the margin, remember to ask about this. And then I show up here this morning, ready to go, prepared to debate this bill, and guess what? Senator, there's going to be a strike-all amendment. And now the bill has 15 sections instead of 12. And maybe it's not as bad as some other strike-all amendments that entirely change every word of the bill, because I think most of it's probably intact, although it's a bit rearranged. But it's not the way we're supposed to do things. The way we're supposed to do things is we're supposed to put the bill in front of the public, and they're supposed to comment on that, and then we come in and vote on it. We're not supposed to let them comment on a bill, and then we never vote on that one. We create a new bill out of whole cloth moments before we vote on it. And we provide the minority with as little time as possible to actually prepare and be ready for such debate. It's not the way we should be doing things. Before we get too far into the details of the bill, I just want to make a couple of things very clear. I don't need a lecture from the majority about civil rights. I feel like watching the press conference that the majority held earlier and some of the comments that I've heard discussing this bill since it's been floating around this building is that somehow they want to take the mantle of defending the individuals of the state of Connecticut against the evil federal agents that are rounding up people and locking them up. I want to just say very clearly that I am the very first person to jump in the way if that I believe that some innocent civilian is being harassed, targeted, or abused by any of our government officials or law enforcement. I believe very strongly in civil liberties, the rule of law, due process, etc. But what's happening here is that there is a manufactured outrage. Certainly, things that have happened in other states like Minneapolis are concerning. But even those instances, we don't have the facts yet. Those items are under investigation. We do not have any convictions. We do not have any documented evidence to suggest that any particular individual was at fault. And even if it turns out that way, and I would condemn the people responsible, even if that's the case, that is not the policy of the federal government. It's not the policy of the President of the United States to attack and round up innocent people. He's been as explicit as anybody you can imagine, and I have been as well, that I will support the president and our federal immigration officials as long as they are sticking to prosecuting criminal aliens and removing them from our streets to keep people safe in America. Beyond that, I'm on the other side of the issue, protecting and defending the innocent. The fact of the matter is that there is an entire news media out there that is stirring things up and creating this false reality. But as I said from the outset, I don't want to bring politics into this room. In here, I want to talk about truth. I want to talk about what's really happening and the substance of the policy that is before us. I do not believe in weaponizing civil rights law like this bill does and expanding government power under the argument that somehow you are holding the government in check, because this bill does the exact opposite. Madam President, I want to ask a few questions to the proponent if I could.
Please proceed, sir.
Thank you very much. Just looking at this section by section, the first section of the bill, from what I can tell, creates a new civil cause of action. Basically, it's a mechanism that will allow federal officers to be sued in a state court. So I'm curious, why are we creating a new cause of action specifically targeting federal officers? Through you, Madam President.
Thank you. Senator Winfield.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I don't know how to answer that, because that would require I say some things that aren't here in the room with us right now, things that have happened outside of the direct conversation we would have about what's happened in Connecticut in some ways, but there are some things that have happened in Connecticut. Look, the reality is, whether we want to create a box for me to operate in during this debate or not, there have been some things that have happened in this country. There have been ways in which certain federal agents have operated that we want to make sure it doesn't happen here. And should it happen here, there's recourse for the citizens of the state for violation of their rights. So what we are trying to do here is make sure that when there are violations, and I just want to be clear, because I heard during both of the good senators' discussions, at least to this point, that we're just out here making the job more difficult for police officers, and because we're going to strip away all of the federal stuff and we're going to just apply this to the officers, police officials we have here in the state. But what we're talking about here is when they have violated someone's rights. That's not part of their job, right? So we're not saying you go about your job, you're doing a good job. We're saying you violated someone's rights under the Constitution of the United States, which we say is what we're here to defend. And I say, when that happens, there should be a way to deal with that. Now, since I have the microphone now, there's also this conversation about the Supremacy Clause and what happens when federal agents are doing their job. It is not their job to violate the rights of anyone. They have constitutional rights which should never be violated. I would assert that most federal actors aren't doing that. I would assert that most police officers aren't doing that. I've asserted this for every bill I've ever done. And we know what people think about what I've said versus what they believe I've said. And I'm not pointing at Senator Sampson, I just want to be clear. But the point of this is to protect people, what we've all said, and to make sure that when something goes awry, they have the ability to get into a court and deal with that. And it's not a violation of the Supremacy Clause, though I know we're going to hear that over and over again. And it's not a violation of the Supremacy Clause for a lot of reasons, one of which is what you're doing here is allowing people to defend their constitutional rights. And there may be federal policy and there may be federal law, but the supreme law of this land is the Constitution of the United States. Through you, Madam President.
Thank you. Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. I appreciate the answer, and I take the gentleman at his word. And, you know, in a vacuum, looking at some of the language in this bill, I don't disagree with the concepts behind it. I disagree with the fact that we have any say over the activities and actions of federal agents acting in their capacity as immigration officials for the federal government. That's prima facie law. That is exactly what is on the books right now. There's little argument over it. Senator Kissel mentioned several cases. I know the most recent one, I think, is Arizona versus the United States. It's been played out many, many times in the past. When states try and enter into the realm of regulating immigration, they get turned over. They just do. So attempting to do it here only has one purpose in my mind, and that is a political purpose. That is my objection, is that this bill is here before us to make a political statement. It's not a legitimate policy statement. It's a political statement. It will be overturned in court, and all that gets to happen is that the majority gets to go out and say, look at us, we stood up against Trump, and we stood up against ICE, and those Republicans, they voted against it, blah, blah, blah. It's a phony argument. It's a phony argument because the fact of the matter is, I'm standing here willing to defend citizens' rights also, and due process, and hold people accountable as much as my colleagues, including Senator Winfield, all day long. There's no argument about that. People that are committing wrongdoing, whether they're doing it in the name of Republicans or Democrats or Trump or anyone else, should be held accountable, period. End of story. I don't know anybody who says otherwise. Nobody wants a king. But at the end of the day, that is not the policy of this administration or that agency, and I don't believe that it's something that is happening on the ground, carte blanche everywhere, much less in Connecticut. That's not to say that you couldn't point to a specific example here and there where you're talking about tens of thousands of interactions in law enforcement. Mistakes are going to be made. Those mistakes should be held to account. But that is much different than trying to create some sort of illusion that there's some sort of terrible, heinous policy afoot, because I don't believe that's what the case is. The section that we're referring to in the bill is all about creating a system to sue federal officers in court, which is something you cannot do. Can I just ask, through you, Madam President, is there any projection about the number of new lawsuits that might occur, or how much this is going to come at a cost to taxpayers? Because obviously, now what's going to happen is if we are going to start suing different law enforcement entities for actions accounted for in this bill, that's going to end up driving up costs. Will municipalities be responsible because they cooperated with ICE authorities? Will the state be responsible because something happens on their watch? Will taxpayers in the state or the towns have to pay that bill? And how much? Do we have any predictions through you?
That's a lot of questions, Senator. Senator Winfield, we can take them in seriatim or all at once. Your pleasure.
Madam President, it's fine. This bill isn't expanding causes of action against this. That's not what we're trying to do here. And I think Senator Sampson started off talking about what the point is here, right? So it is to make sure that there's a way to get those federal actors who, yes, may be rare, who act outside of what their duties are, who act under what we would call the color of law, looking like they're operating under the law, but really doing things they're not supposed to do. So this is, one, not something that I've figured out what exactly it's going to cost. Folks have tried to do that before. They tried to do that with police accountability, telling me that there'd be all these cases. There's just none so far, 6 years later. But this is about the federal agents who are operating in a way that we don't want them to operate. And I'm hearing that it's not the policy of the federal government. I'm glad that it's not the policy, which should say to most folks, for the most part, this is not going to do all that much because there won't be that many opportunities. But when those opportunities arise, it should. And, you know, folks will tell you you can't sue a federal actor. It happens all the time, by the way. Post office, someone's driving a postal truck and they're reckless, they find themselves in court. I don't know why people think the federal supremacy clause necessarily means that you can't do some of the stuff we're talking about. I mean, you know, you want to talk about cases, there's Bivens versus Six, and then the cases that fall after Westfall and the Westfall Act. You know, they talk about there's a loophole in it. You know what that loophole is? The Constitution. You can't violate the rights of folks. And yes, people can find themselves in court because you have to have a way for the Constitution to matter. Otherwise, what you would actually be setting up is a system in which federal actors could do whatever they want inside of a state and the laws of the state don't matter. And I don't think anybody who says they support the Constitution want that, through you, Madam President.
Thank you. Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I appreciate the comments by the good chairman, who I have tremendous respect for. And I will address his comments first, and then we'll get back to the question I asked. which is that no one is suggesting that the Supremacy Clause means that federal agents can do whatever they please inside the state of Connecticut. The Supremacy Clause, as I described earlier, says that the federal government has supremacy on certain policy issues, including our borders and immigration. So when they are acting as officials regulating our border or immigration, they are acting under federal law. The state does not have the ability to interfere with that law or to change that law or to tell them otherwise. And that is precisely what Section 1 of this bill does. Section 1 of this bill creates an entirely new cause of action that allows a mechanism to sue federal agents for performing their duties as federal immigration agents. That's what it does. The issue I have is I don't know whether I should be happy about the response I got from the good chairman that if nothing's happening, that means that it's not going to end up costing the towns a lot of money because of the lawsuits that might come, or that it might cost them a lot. I don't know where to go with that. So, which is it? Is this a good policy that is going to cause more lawsuits to hold these federal agents acting outside their role defined by Connecticut, not the federal government, accountable, is a good thing and we're going to sue them and we're going to collect damages? Or is it a bad thing because it's going to end up costing taxpayers? Through you.
Thank you, Senator Winfield.
Well, Madam President, I did answer that question, and I said that this doesn't create any new liability for municipalities. I think I said that. So that is an answer to the question. It may not be the answer that's desired, and I get that, but that is the answer to the question. But I don't think the answer, I don't think the paradigm is as simple as one might put it. Is it a good thing because it does this, or a bad thing because it does that? Similar to what I said at the time of the work we were doing on the police accountability bill, right? It's not good because a bunch of police officers would get sued, and it's not bad because they don't. It's good because should something happen, in which I don't know when or if that's going to happen, should something happen, the citizens have a right to access the courts and potentially find relief. That's what makes it good. And I think when we try to put it into a specific box of good is this and bad is that, we forget that this is not, and I know it's been characterized by some this way, this is not an attempt to wring all the money out of anybody. This is not what we're trying to, that's not what I'm trying to do. What we're trying to do is make sure that the people who live in this state, on what probably would be one of the worst days of their life, should their federal constitutional rights be violated, also know that we thought ahead and protected those rights by putting together a bill that does exactly what this does. And I would be remiss if I don't say this, because I think some people are going to be, when are you going to get to it? When the vote is taken, I ask it to be taken by roll, Madam President.
Thank you. Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and thank you again for the response from the chairman. And I don't want to go tit for tat or come across that I'm arguing with the good chairman. He has his right to his opinions and his belief about what is going on in this bill. For me, it's pretty clear. Our federal, no, let me rephrase that. Our constitutionally protected rights are just that. That's what they are. They're constitutionally protected already. Okay, so if there is a violation of someone's due process today, right now, forget this bill or any other, if that happens, guess what? A lawyer can go into a courtroom and argue in defense of someone's civil rights if they're being violated. If someone's due process rights are being violated, that can happen. You do not need to pass a new law. The Constitution is the Constitution, and our rights are already protected. And if that's, you don't need a new law to make sure someone's rights are protected, which is the answer that I heard. And that's not what Section 1 does. Section 1 creates a new mechanism for a civil cause of action. That's what it does. It's entirely new language. It's 30 lines. Not only does it create that new cause of action, it also creates a lengthy list of potential awards as far as damages, and I believe that is going to create an instrument of encouraging lawsuits, which I don't think should be the goal. Let's move on to Section 2, because I think that we have to take this bill as a whole. Step 1 establishes the cause of action. Number 2 is all about the Attorney General's authority. And I'm reading this to say that there's a new addition to a current statute that now provides that the Attorney General of the state of Connecticut will have this expanded authority to now investigate, intervene, or bring civil or administrative action, on and on, I won't read the whole paragraph, based on someone who engages in a practice or has established a policy. And I'm just going to ask right out of the gate, I think I know what that means, but I want to ask the good chairman, what is meant by or has established a policy? What kind of policy, through you?
Thank you, Senator Winfield.
I'm sorry, Madam President. I was trying to keep up with that. I hadn't gotten to where are you in the bill?
Senator Sampson.
Through you, Madam President, I am on line 40 in Section 2.
Thank you, Senator Winfield.
I think it's language that clarifies that if there is a policy that functions in the way that the following section, sub 1, sub 2, forward would operate, that would apply to any policies that are established in addition to actions that have been taken.
Thank you, Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. So this new addition and power that the Attorney General has goes from simply being able to investigate, intervene, or act when there is a pattern of conduct. Now, he can act based on the establishment of a policy. And it goes on to add additional language, which I think is actually quite key to this. In lines 59 and 64, I noticed that there are words that have not been included up to this point, where it says other persons. And without getting into a big debate about the difference in what type of constitutionally protected rights individuals have inside the confines of these United States, I do believe there is a dispute over whether or not folks that are in the country unlawfully have the same level of rights as someone who is a U.S. citizen. And I believe that this section, Section 2, and the paragraphs that I just mentioned, the one starting 59 and the one starting 62, are designed to expand into an area of providing additional constitutional protections that are not in the Constitution for other persons, which would be people not in the country lawfully. Am I correct about that, Madam President?
Thank you, Senator Winfield.
Thank you, Madam President. And as the good senator says, this is a subject that is being debated, but to this point, the way that that Constitution has been interpreted is that the Constitution applies to the folks who are here, not just citizens. And so while, and I think this is a perspective thing, while some might take the argument, I sat around all day fascinated by the arguments at the Supreme Court not too long ago, while some might take the argument being made by one side and believe that that's where we're going to wind up, I think the way that we have operated, the way that the Constitution has currently been interpreted, would say that we're not expanding anything, but making sure that we cover all who have been covered to this point, through you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. And again, I appreciate the answer. But what I would say about that is that it was very similar a response to the previous response I got, which is that we're not adding anything, we're not doing anything, we're not creating a cause of action. All we're doing is ensuring the constitutional rights of individuals. And again, I'm going to repeat, if that was merely all that was going on, there'd be no bill. Your constitutional rights already exist. Citizen, non-citizen, whatever the circumstances are, if you have constitutionally protected rights, you can make an argument for them right now. You don't need a Connecticut bill, which will ultimately be found unconstitutional for violation of the Supremacy Clause, to try and enforce something that already exists. And I also don't believe that's what's happening here. I believe that what's happening here is that we're trying to expand the protections to folks that are not citizens, unlike our current statutory framework. And I believe this is another piece of this larger puzzle of this 15-section bill, where the first 12 sections are all designed to create a mechanism that will allow a course of action to occur for a couple of reasons. One, to make a strong political argument condemning the President of the United States and federal law enforcement officials. And I can't go by without saying it once again, that if there are some situations that have arisen around this nation, in Minneapolis or elsewhere, those are one-off circumstances. And those things should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. I'm not going to defend bad behavior from anyone. Not going to defend any overreach of any government entity, whether they're in my party or not. I'm the first guy to be like, look, the government should be held accountable. So, to me, that's a specious argument. Completely. Section 3 is another interesting section of the bill, because this one intends to redefine something that we have in our current law, which is the notion of peace officers. And now what it will do is it will add federal agents. And by the way, I just want to point out that nowhere in this bill is the word ICE or immigration. What the heck is the name? What does ICE even stand for? I forget. That's right. That's right. That's not mentioned anywhere in the bill. Okay? The framework of the bill is inclusive of any federal law enforcement. So we're talking about DEA agents, ATF agents. We're talking about even IRS agents, presumably. Maybe we can let it stay. I'm just kidding. The thing is that Section 3 redefines peace officer for the purpose of including federal agents. And now what it will do, it will allow the state to take over investigations where they had no authority before. Can I ask through you, Madam President, what is the purpose of allowing the state of Connecticut to interfere with a completely federal investigation on a subject that the state has no authority in, through you?
Thank you, Senator Winfield.
Madam President, I think that the state does have some authority. It happened within the bounds of the state. There are laws that deal with those things. And yes, this does deal with federal actors, but no federal actors should be violating people's constitutional rights. And in terms of being able to get into the court and defend your rights right now, that's just not how it works. I've mentioned Bivens and then Westfall, and I'm not going to get into all the specifics of those cases, but the thrust of that is that the Supreme Court actually said, hey, people should be able to, when their rights are violated, get into a court and, defend the fact that their rights were violated. And then there were people who didn't like that. The federal government didn't really like that. There were actors who wanted to have more immunity. And so we created this whole hodgepodge of laws and cases in which it is really difficult to get into a court. It's really difficult. And the loophole in all of that happens to be that whatever they've tried to do to limit this, they just can't figure out quite how to limit it enough that the supreme law of the land, the Constitution, doesn't prevail, right? And so what we've said is, yeah, because that matters. And that is what we're doing here, to make sure that at the state level, where it's very difficult to get into a federal court to defend your rights, you have the opportunity to do it here in the state, through you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I just want people who are listening to recognize that I'm actually listening to my colleague here. I'm paying attention to every word that he says, and I'm trying to understand his perspective and really get to the heart of what's going on here. And I will say that I'm completely sympathetic to what was just described, which is the notion that there may be efforts on behalf of some government entities, frankly, to basically block or restrict the imposition, that's a bad word to use when you're talking about the Constitution, but the use of the constitutional framework in some circumstances because it makes it inconvenient for law enforcement. And I can certainly respect a desire to protect against that. I'm with you 100% in the concept. But what we have to remember here is that this bill has no influence over any of that. Any attempt to rewrite that implementation of those obstructive clauses in law is not going to prevail in a state-level policy. I would strongly encourage the majority to go talk to their federal delegation and go to work making these same cases on a federal level. You know, if you think that we need to change the rule of law when it comes to law enforcement and federal law enforcement and how it is applied to make sure constitutional protections are stronger and that they're preserved properly, then do that. But trying to write a state law that does that, it doesn't work. We don't have the power to do that. I want to be as polite as I can, but one of the things that frustrates me about this place more than anything, in particular, serving in the minority, is that I witness, frankly, again, this is going to come around as bad, but the arrogance of the majority that they think that they can do so many things beyond what you can do. You cannot rewrite federal law. I'm sorry that you don't like the results of the most recent federal election and who's in control of Congress or who the president is. I'm sorry you don't like that. I didn't like it much before this most recent election either. But I didn't go try and rewrite state law to fly in the face of federal supremacy. I didn't do that. Because I recognize that more important than me or my views or who the president is, I recognize that the rule of law is what's paramount. And that we have to respect it. That we have to respect what's written down. That we have to honor the notion of our principles as Americans and the way our founding documents were crafted and the laws and rights that are protected by our founding documents. This is a political attempt to undermine policy implemented on a federal law. If that policy was actually a threat to constitutional protections, I guarantee you there would be prominent court cases out there that would be debating it ad nauseum on a day-to-day basis. Let's talk about the next sections. Looks like 4 and 5 are more or less conforming. There might be a few things to talk about there, but I want to keep it moving. 6, section 6, this is about masks. I find this ironic. This is going to be a policy that says that federal agents can no longer, and again, this is one of those policies that will end up after the supremacy clause is brought up in some courtroom somewhere. This is something that will end up interfering with the ability of local and state police officers to function. This is a restriction on officers wearing masks, facial coverings, and putting requirements on them to make sure that they have a visible badge and name tag. All of that sounds really, really good until you start to recognize that sometimes there are sting operations, and there are tactics involved, and there are different aspects of criminal justice and enforcement that might preclude some of these things on a day-to-day basis. I also want to say something that is unbelievably ironic about this bill, which is that every year since I've been here, including this one, we have had numerous bills come to this chamber about protecting the identity of various state employees, whether they be people that work for the Attorney General's office or college professors or teachers. And I completely understand my colleagues when they come forward and they say, look, the the world is dangerous today and we need to protect certain people and everything else. But to do all that and to make the case for that and then to come here and to bring out a bill that's going to tell us that what's a good idea to make sure that the federal enforcement agents that you are vilifying on a day-to-day basis should not have the same protection. The fact is that those folks are wearing masks because their very lives are in danger because of the political climate in this country. Because there is an entire political party and a national machine trying to undermine the efforts of the national immigration enforcement that's going on. That's what's happening. So those people need to protect themselves. They're in grave danger, frankly, just for doing their job. There were ICE agents, brand new on the job. I think one of them was something like a 22-year-old girl. She was murdered in cold blood just because she was an ICE agent. She hadn't done anything to anyone. She didn't deprive anyone of their rights. She wasn't in Minneapolis. So these law enforcement agents, and I'll extend it beyond, obviously, ICE, the local police back in my hometown of Woolkit, the state cop that pulled me over the other day, nice guy, they go to work every day at risk of not coming home. Senator Kissel said this so eloquently, I hate to even say it again because he did such a good job. But it is true. These people put on the uniform in the morning and they go to work and they do a job that is so hard because they don't know on any given day what they're going to run into. What chaos is waiting for them. And maybe it'll be an average day and nothing happens. But for that young ICE agent, guarantee you she didn't predict that was going to happen. And just because she was wearing a specific uniform. And this bill says, no, we're going to make sure that you are made public to everyone. We're going to put a target right on you. That's what this bill does. That's what Section 6 is about. It's about putting a target on people. Through you, Madam President, would you agree with me that this makes those officers more vulnerable?
Senator Winfield.
Thank you, Madam President. I don't know how I could agree with that. I think if the question were, is it possible that anyone who's wearing a uniform and doing the job of a law enforcement officer might find themselves on a certain day in a place where they never wanted to be, experiencing things they don't want to experience, including and up to assaults and potentially death? Well, that's part of the job as suggested. Do I think this makes them less safe? No. I think we can talk all we want about there's some agenda to go after ICE. I think ICE, the way it is operated, has caused people to have a perspective on ICE. Maybe some people don't want to say that, but I'll say it. The way that they have operated, it caused people to have a perspective on them. Regardless of all of that, we don't have secret police in the United States of America. And when you can cover up your name badge and your face and no one knows who you are, that's what you are. So I guess the question really should be, what do we want in the United States of America? And if they're bad actors who go after and do things to ICE, they should be prosecuted and put in jail or whatever the appropriate punishment is. That doesn't mean we create a system of secret police. That doesn't mean we say they can go forward and operate in however they want, because there's nothing the states can do, although I just pointed to the law that says that the laws that say that we can. Maybe for some people it is a political thing. Maybe for some people they have a thing about ICE and they want to go after ICE. But the person standing here defending this bill is concerned about the citizens of the state of Connecticut and what happens to them when either ICE or the police, because I have a whole history, do things they are not supposed to do, up to and including the violation of people's civil rights. And if we say there's nothing we could do, I'm not sure what we're doing here, through you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I appreciate my colleague so much, and I appreciate his passion. But I have to tell you, I could not more strenuously disagree with the categorization of any group of people based on their job. It's worse, in fact, maybe even than generalizing people based on their race, their religion, their complexion. It's insane. Why would we say we're concerned about the way ICE is behaving, so maybe the way we ought to treat ICE? ICE is not some kind of cohesive one entity. They're a bunch of individual Americans doing a job, a very difficult job, and I would argue that most of them are doing a very good job. Does that mean that I'm going to defend the bad actions of a few? No. And anyone who tries to put that on me, you're doing it in error. But the fact of the matter is, to make a categorical statement that ICE should be held responsible for the actions of other ICE agents, that's like saying somebody should be held responsible because somebody of the same religion committed an act. That's absurd, Madam President. It's fundamentally flawed, and it goes against everything that we believe in America, which is that we protect the rights of individuals. Everything in our entire foundational system is about putting the aspect and recognition of groups as a separate thing that is secondary to respecting the rights of individual people. Individuals have rights in America, not groups. And we do not categorically condemn people based on their race or their religion or their job. We don't. If you want to condemn the policies of ICE, go ahead. But to suggest that somehow what has gone on in this country over the last several years, ever since, I think, the George Floyd incident, where there's a movement to defund and vilify police officers, and now to vilify agents of the federal government simply doing the job that they were hired to do, which is to protect the safety of American citizens against criminal aliens. And we're going to talk more about criminal aliens, monsters, frankly, that have harmed innocent American civilians in a few minutes. But to suggest that all of that has not put ICE agents in a position where they need to fear for their very lives because of their identities being exposed is absurd to me. That young lady was shot in cold blood because she was wearing an ICE uniform. Where have we strayed from our path that we could think that somehow there's any justification to blaming all ICE agents for the behavior of a few, magnified under the microscope of national media attention and rhetoric coming from a political party and a bunch of people bent on their hatred of the president? I get it. But I will never stoop that low. When I debate my political opponents, I do it based on the substance and the merit of the policies that we're putting forward. I don't categorize them. I don't vilify them. I do not misrepresent even their point of view on things. We should be above that, which is why I said we shouldn't be bringing that kind of political garbage into our Senate chamber. The next section of the bill is all about creating protected areas. It also does something that I think is very, very sneaky, which is this notion of judicial warrants. What this bill does basically is it says now that law enforcement officials, federal law enforcement officials, are no longer allowed, to do their job effectively if they're doing it on any property that is a government property. And I know that some of my colleagues are going to talk about this at some greater length later, but that also means that, like, you can't have the immigration officials show up at a prison, for example, to take custody of someone. It's an absurdity. And some have said that, well, we want those folks to serve the crime that they did. So do I. But on the day that they've served their sentence, This bill would suggest that somehow that person should just be left to go back into Connecticut society. And they shouldn't be susceptible to immigration agents intercepting them. But the other part of this, I think, is even more concerning, and that is this notion of a judicial warrant. Anyone who understands our national immigration policy recognizes that these immigration officials do not rely on judicial warrants to do their job. This is the same debate we had during the Trust Act conversation. The fact of the matter is that they are empowered to detain people suspected of being in the country illegally, particularly if they have criminal activity and criminal backgrounds. They have that power. They do not need a judicial warrant. They will use something called an administrative warrant. And I understand that there are folks in this room that would like to change that and require a judicial warrant, but guess what? You don't serve in Congress. You don't serve in Congress, you can't change it. If you want to change it, run for Congress. ICE agents need an administrative warrant, and putting it in this bill to suggest that they need a judicial warrant is not going to work, because the very first time that is cited, the supremacy clause will be brought forward in that courtroom, and that part will be struck down. I could ask a few questions, but I don't know if it's really necessary. I want to get to what the heart of this bill is about for me. I know what it's about for the majority. This is all about making some sort of strong statement condemning the president and condemning the misbehaving ICE agents and things like that. And I get it. That might be a convenient political argument to be making in an election year. And it might be very inconvenient for me to try and defend common sense to say, look, let's prosecute the bad guys, but let's not go ahead and throw the whole baby out with the bathwater. Let's suggest that we still need to have immigration enforcement in this country, and that we should try and stand by our law enforcement officials unless they're doing wrong. I think that's a pretty common sense argument. I'm just saddened that it doesn't get more airtime, because I think if that argument got as much airtime as the constant vilification of some law enforcement officials that are trying to do their job, maybe we might have a more reasonable discussion. But for me, my immediate reaction upon hearing some of my colleagues talk about ICE as if they're such tremendous villains, and about how this is a terrible thing, and conflating the notion of immigrants with illegal immigrants, and ignoring the fact that a lot of the people that we're talking about are extreme criminals. What it's about for me, and what's so important to me about this debate, are the victims. Where are the victims of criminal aliens that have harmed innocent citizens in this bill? Nowhere. They are forgotten, they are ignored, they do not exist. I think the majority would like to pretend there is no such thing, and that every person that ICE picks up is somehow some angel. Which is why anytime there's some mishap, there's some opportunity because ICE picked up someone, a school student who had a different name, or there was some typo or something like that, boom, let's run to the cameras, let's make sure we highlight this incredible atrocity. But you know something? They never bring it up when they actually bag someone who is a rapist or a murderer or a killer. They never bother. We never hear about that. There are people, we're people, that are dead now, no longer with us, parents who lost their children. There are husbands who've lost their wives. There are kids that lost their parents because of criminal aliens in this country bent on doing harm. And before I go any further, and I feel stupid having to do this all the time, but I gotta make sure that no one misrepresents what I'm talking about, I I believe America is a land of immigration and freedom, and it should welcome as many people from all over the world as possible. But we have to do that through a process. Everybody knows I just got married a couple days ago. I married a woman who came here from another country lawfully. She had to wait in line, she had to go through the process, she had to pay a bunch of fees to do so, but she came here the right way. And I get it, even when we're talking about people that don't go through that process, people that cross the border because they're looking at their life in Mexico or someplace else and saying, you know what, I want the best opportunity I can have, and America still represents that. I kind of get it. I totally do. I'm not defending crossing the border illegally, but I get it. I'm not hostile to people who want to live in America for a better life. I'm certainly not anti-immigrant. And I notice when these arguments are always made in the press or by political entities, they always forget the word illegal when we're talking about policies that are specifically about illegal aliens and not just plain immigrants. So that's my aside to remind you, I'm an American like everybody else. All of my relatives came here in the 20s from all corners of the world. I got relatives from Greece, from Italy. They came here looking for a better life. How could I ever be against that? But what I am against are gangs and drug dealers and human traffickers and people that want to prey not just on Americans, but also on their own neighbors and friends from people from their own country. This was my objection to the Trust Act to begin with. The Trust Act was sold to this legislature way back in 2013 as a mechanism to say, well, you know what, Senator, what we need to do is we need to create a mechanism for people to not fear for being deported, but we want them to be able to come forward in case there's a problem. That was never an issue. That was never an issue. The New Haven Police Department is not going to be like, oh, Madam Illegal Immigrant, since you've called us to report the drug dealer down the hall, we're going to call the immigration services and have them come get you. That never happened. You could report things anonymously, for crying out loud. That was an absurdity even when it was told to us then. But what it did is it created a mechanism where we protected the criminal element in those neighborhoods. And what did they do? They preyed on their other more law-abiding neighbors. A series of very, very bad policies that have undermined everything. Let me just say this too. People that defend the Trust Act and try and condemn ICE and everything else as if they are such tremendous friends to our undocumented immigrant friends. They're not your friends. They're not actually helping you. You might get to live in Connecticut in a sanctuary state. But what kind of sanctuary is it when you don't have the same rights as the other people around you? Where you have to live as a second-class non-citizen. You can't vote. You can't legally work. What ought to happen is we ought to go back to enforcing our actual national immigration policy in full and finding a way to make sure that we have the ability to let in as many people into this country lawfully as possible, as long as they are adding to this country and our heritage. That's what should happen. That's a common sense way to look at immigration policy. And I could talk about it here, but nothing I can do because I'm not in Congress. I wish we had people in Congress willing to have that conversation, though. So now that I've made it very clear where I stand on the subject of immigration, I want to go back to talking about the victims. You've heard some of these names before. They're certainly national names. There's Laken Riley. She was a real person. She was a 22-year-old lovely woman. She was a student at Augusta University in Athens, Georgia, and she was murdered by a guy named Jose Ibarra, who was an illegal immigrant here from Venezuela. She died by blunt force trauma and asphyxia. And the police documentation says that she fought him off while he was attempting to rape her. This guy was a monster. And he was in this country because he violated our immigration laws and because many, many people involved in politics have been trying their best to make sure that the Jose Ibarras of the world are allowed to stay here in sanctuary cities and sanctuary states, hiding behind the Trust Act and so on. Maybe Laken Riley's family would still have Laken Riley in their lives if that was not the case. You may have heard the name Rachel Morin. Victor Martinez Hernandez was found guilty Monday of the murder of Maryland mother Rachel Morin in 2023. The jury convicted Martinez Hernandez on charges of first-degree premeditated murder, first-degree rape, third-degree sex offense, and kidnapping. She was a 37-year-old mother of 5. This woman had 5 children. Those 5 children have no mother now. And they have no mother because Mr. Martinez Hernandez, who was arrested in Oklahoma, entered the United States illegally from El Salvador in 2023 and has known ties to gangs. He left this woman brutally attacked and murdered in a drainage ditch. I'm sorry, I'm a little choked up. If you read these news stories and you find out about these actual people, and let's not forget, these are real people. These aren't just random names I'm pulling out of a hat. These are people who had relatives. They had lives. For the most part, they're young people who were at the start of their lives. I got so many articles here, I don't know what's what. Kayla Hamilton. This is a news story from Baltimore. Kayla Hamilton's murder recorded on voicemail while her killer claims more victims. This is another gentleman, Walter Javier Martinez, from El Salvador. She was a 20-year-old girl with autism. She was raped, tied up, and strangled with a phone cord. By someone who was not even supposed to be in this country lawfully. You probably heard of Molly Tibbetts. There's not just pain and destruction in the rest of the country. Sometimes there's pain and destruction in Connecticut, too. Here's a case. I just want to get my notes all set here. This is the case of Christian Espinoza. Federal immigration authorities are slamming Connecticut's sanctuary rules after agents had to track down a man who was charged with seeking sex from a 13-year-old girl and then released on bond. Christian Espinoza Sarango, 33, faces charges of enticing a minor, attempt to commit a second-degree sexual assault and risk of injury, and so on. And I want to just get to the rest of this story because I believe that this gentleman was actually released. You don't have to look far. There was a Connecticut Insider article that came out in August 20th of just this last year that describes ICE arresting 65 people in the U.S. illegally over a 4-day Connecticut operation. And before anyone suggests that somehow these were all innocent angels, I want to point you to a website that anyone watching can go visit right this minute. And that is the Department of Homeland Security website, dhs.gov. And right on their website, you can look up Connecticut. And they have a section, state by state, and you can look up arrested, worst of the worst. And it is page after page after page after page of undocumented aliens that are also violent criminals that have been apprehended inside the confines of Connecticut. I'm just going to give you a smattering, but understand that I have pages and pages of these. Neri Alberto Aragon Ruano from Waterbury, assault. Jorge Nava Soco, aggravated assault, weapons, robbery, drugs. I can't read the town, I'm sorry. Jorge Castrotello, cruelty toward child, Enfield. Brijesh Grohl, obstructing justice, fraud. It's not just violent crime either. There's fraud. There's a guy in here who was arrested under some sort of RICO charges. Here's a guy, Adelie Rosario Ramirez, Hartford, drug trafficking. Here's Jose Yadisela Morquecho. I'm sorry about that. Sex assault, neglecting a child, cruelty toward a child in Danbury. Jose Chocua Diaz, sexual assault, cruelty toward a child, Brooklyn, Connecticut. Burglary, assault, aggravated assault, lewd, lascivious acts with a minor, sexual assault. That's the most common thing in here, sexual assault. It's off the chart. Molestation of a minor, Douglas Flores, Brooklyn, Connecticut. Again, page after page after page. Go up and look, dhs.gov. Don't take my word for it. You got your phone, go take a look. Look up Connecticut. That's what this bill is about. This bill, I know the majority thinks that they're having a big win here because they're getting to slap around Trump and ICE. But what they're really doing is protecting monsters. Like these people that I just mentioned that murdered these innocent civilians. Like the guy that murdered that young, new-on-the-job ICE agent. That's what this bill does. It is designed to protect those monsters. These aren't political talking points. Some might say, oh, Sampson's in there grandstanding. Damn right I am. Somebody needs to understand that these are real people. That this isn't a game we're playing. This isn't just about who makes the most quirky, cool talking points to the press so that we can win the next election. We're talking about the actual lives of real people, innocent people, taken too early because of terrible policy enacted for political purposes. Not because it's good policy. My number one thing that makes me the most sad as an adult, you know how when you're a kid, everything seems bright and there's opportunity, and when I grow up, okay, I'm a grown-up now. And the one thing that I discovered as a grown-up that makes me sadder than anything else is that the Connecticut State Legislature doesn't make policy that's good for people. No, that's not what's going on here. We're not sitting in a room trying to figure out what the best policy is and working together and trying to figure out how we're going to keep our people back home happy and full of opportunity. It's not what happens here. Very rarely. I don't want to say never. Can't say. Some of my colleagues, we work on some things very well together. But on these big items, it's not about good policy. It's about politics. It's about rhetoric. It's about crushing the other side. It's about mischaracterizing the other side in a way to vilify them, to make them hated, and in fact, to put targets on all of our backs. And I think it's true regardless of what political party you're in. I've seen Senator Duff's Facebook commentary. Glad I'm not him when I read some of the comments. I get terrible comments too. What we ought to be doing is being better examples to the people back home to show that we can actually work together and that we might disagree, but we can disagree respectfully. But when we see a bill like this, for me, it's out the window. This is no attempt to disagree respectfully. This is no attempt to come up with some good policy for the benefit of Americans. That's not what this is. This is a political game. This is about slapping around people for political reasons because we've got to win an election. These are real people, real victims, real lives lost. And plenty of other people whose lives are forever altered because they were a grandmother who lost their home because of fraud, or because they were molested as a child by someone who shouldn't have been in the country at all. And you know what the most uncomfortable truth is about all of it? Is that every one of these was preventable. If we had leadership on a federal level that actually recognized the importance of having a secure border for many, many years, decades, in fact, when we didn't, if we didn't have state policy finding ways to attract criminal aliens into our state by flashing a big neon sign, come here, we'll give you a driver's license, we'll give you tuition benefits, we'll give you health insurance. Forget the fact that there's a law out there that says that you're supposed to go through the border properly with permission. Forget that there's plenty of other people around the world that are waiting in line, doing the right thing. Civil rights matter. I do agree with the good chairman as far as that goes. I think what's funny is that early on when I was still in the House, I remember there were a couple of votes that were very, very civil libertarian oriented, and I believe Senator Winfield and I were the only two no votes in judiciary on a couple of those items because we were such strong defenders of civil liberty. I haven't changed, and I know he hasn't. And I understand that he comes from this bill as a mechanism to actually produce additional civil liberty protections for undocumented people. I think that's where he comes from this bill. But as I said, I don't think the bill passes constitutional muster, and at the end of the day, what it really does is it undermines the federal law enforcement officials that have a very tough job to do. Civil rights do matter. There's no question. But so do the rights of innocent people to get to see their 23rd birthday. So does the right of a child not to be lured by a predator. If we're going to talk about justice, then we need to talk about all the victims, not just the people that might have been wronged in Minneapolis or somewhere, who I certainly care about their civil rights too. But you can't just pretend they're the only victims. I got a much longer list of victims. This is not theoretical. This bill is going to have consequences. And when someone commits a crime down the road as a result, and some young woman doesn't get to go home to her husband or her family, or someone dies of an overdose because some drugs were trafficked into the country, or God knows what else, the question we should ask ourselves is whether the policies that we made in this chamber had anything to do with that. If we had the opportunity to vote in a certain way to prevent those things from occurring, did we do our job to help prevent that outcome? I kind of got off track as I was going through the bill section by section, and I didn't get to the end of the bill. I'll just add that Section 11 is the section that really takes away the federal immunity that federal agents are accustomed to, much like the Police Accountability Bill took away qualified immunity for Connecticut police officers back in 2020. I don't believe that we are in a better place now as a result. Now, we can argue that, but I don't believe we are. I think what happened when that bill passed in 2020 is many of our most qualified police officers left the force for greener pastures, fearful that they could get embroiled in some lawsuit for doing nothing wrong. Imagine how difficult it is to be a cop, just for a minute, knowing that your qualified immunity is now gone. And you're being asked on a day-to-day basis, hour by hour, to go show up in places where there's drama, where there's confrontation, even if it's just a domestic. You're showing up, rolling up in your cruiser to somebody's house, and inside you got a couple screaming at each other, throwing pots and pans. Do you want to be in that room knowing that you could end up getting sued for whatever happens? Of course not. So clearly the quality of law enforcement has declined as a direct result. No fault of the police. They just have to be that much more careful now. Because this body passed a stupid law that undermined their ability to do their job safely, so that they could, after putting on the uniform in the morning and risking their lives every day, at least have some confidence knowing that if they followed the rules, they could actually be protected. This bill is laid out in a very, very specific way, and it's not random. Number 1 creates the new cause of action, Section 1. Section 3 puts the federal law enforcement officers into state law. Section 6 is the one that restricts how they operate. Section 8 restricts where they operate. And Section 10 removes their protections. Well, I suppose that's Section 11. But it's all designed to undermine law enforcement at every level. And as Senator Kissel so appropriately pointed out during his remarks, and Senator Harding during our little press gaggle earlier stated, what's really at stake here when you strip away all of the part that is going to be found unconstitutional via the Supremacy Clause is more restrictions on our local and state police departments, making it even harder for them to do the very difficult job that they do. This is not about accountability. It's not about reform. This is political theater. This bill is here to make some statement about Trump and ICE. Meanwhile, families are struggling, costs are rising, the state is more and more unaffordable, and we are wasting our time having this political debate. I believe in civil rights, as I pointed out. I believe in accountability. I believe in limiting the government power maybe more than anybody in this room. And that's exactly why I oppose this bill. Because while this bill claims to be limiting the overreach of government in one area, it is expanding the government power dramatically, particularly the Attorney General of this state of Connecticut. Do not tell me this is about accountability when this is about accusation. Do not tell me that any of this is transparent when we got a 40-page strike-all amendment hours before we had to debate this bill. Do not tell me that this has anything to do with leadership when this is all about theater. The people of Connecticut deserve better. That's all I have, Madam President.
Have all the members voted? Have all the members voted? If all members have voted, the machine will be locked. Would the clerk please announce the tally?
Senate Amendment C, Senate Bill 397. Total number voting 33, total voting yea 10, total voting nay 23, absent not voting 3.
Amendment fails. Will you remark on the bill? Will you remark further on the bill?
All right. Have all the senators voted? The machine is locked. Mr. Clerk, kindly announce the tally, please.
Senate Bill 397 as amended. Total number voting 34, total voting yea 24, total voting nay 10, absent not voting 2.
Legislation passes.